Okay. So for today's session, it's entitled Surviving Programmatic Risks, Navigating Political and Corporate Oversight in Systems Engineering. So a very interesting topic. I'm sure it's something that we each face, or if you haven't already, you either are or you will. I think this is a good topic. We've got Ken Curtin here today to speak to us. Ken has 29 years of experience with Boeing and Rockwell, plus an additional 16 years in the commercial and government sectors. Ken holds a Bachelor of Science in Physics from Cal State and a Master's of Science in Systems Architecting and Engineering from USC. Ken classifies himself as retired, but he still serves as a part-time lecturer at USC and has been doing so since 1996. Ken's expertise includes enterprise systems architecture, system of systems modeling and integration, complex network systems interoperability, resilience engineering, and avionics design for manned and unmanned space systems. Ken chairs the INCOSE Resilient Systems Working Group and serves on AIAA Space Settlement and Systems Engineering technical committees. Ken previously co-chaired the IEEE SMC MBSE working group and served as a technical council chair emeritus for the NCO Industry Consortium. I'd like now to extend a warm Canadian welcome to Ken. Thank you for joining us, Ken, and I'll let you take over the screen and proceed with your presentation.
Thank you very much, Ivan, and welcome everyone. I really wanted to give a grateful welcome to the INCOSE Canada chapter for the opportunity to present this rather unusual topic. This turns out to be the basis of a class that I've been teaching at the University of Southern California for the last 30 plus years. But I wanted to share this with you simply because I think that's going to be a great value to you. Now, I'm going to flip through the introduction very quickly, only to point out, along with Ivan Taylor and others, I'm a member of the Resilient Systems Working Group. I'm the chair at the moment, but I am looking forward to presenting this to you because, very simply, design and development of any major engineering system is often strongly influenced by politically driven processes for funding and for approval of that project. Now, I'm not just talking about governments. I'm talking about large organizations such as major corporations and very large nonprofit organizations. Even the INCOSE is an example of one of these systems where the processes will drive the engineering. And we system engineers are very well trained in analytical techniques for dealing with cost risk, schedule risk, and performance risk, and doing design of systems. But we're often woefully unprepared for the role of governmental or organizational politics in their projects. So I'm going to propose that system engineers would benefit from training in political risk mitigation tools, specifically programmatic risks. Now, these will be heuristics along the way that Eberhard Rechten proposed them many, many years ago, that will be short, snappy things that you can easily memorize that will aid in understanding the non-technical processes that inevitably affect your engineering decisions. Now, the INCOSE has defined programmatic risk as those things that are produced by events beyond the control of the program manager. And you can see from this diagram here that cost risk, technical or performance risk, and schedule risk all interrelate. But in the middle is programmatic risk, and it's very, very rarely emphasized. So this tends to be underappreciated. The INCOSE defines programmatic risks as events that are often produced by decisions made by personnel at higher levels of authority. These will include things like reduction in project priority, delays in receiving authorization to proceed with the project, reduced or delayed project funding, changes in organizational or national objectives or others. That's very, very top level. I'm going to give you much lower level detail. And as it turns out, programmatic risk can be a source of risk in any of the other three risk categories. So programmatic risk may affect your cost, schedule, and performance. Now, I've drawn this out many, many years ago in a paper I wrote in 1993. And this is a sort of a Venn diagram, but it looks more like a bullseye. I want you to imagine a bunch of technical people that are working on a project. They are surrounded by management people who manage things. And notice that technical people are primarily focused on performance. Oh, they're aware of the cost and schedule, but they're mostly worried about the design and the performance. Management people tend to be aware of the performance, but they're primarily focused on doing things according to schedule. Yes, they know about the cost. Around the management folks are business people, and these folks are primarily focused on cost. They may have some idea of the schedule and performance, but they want to know how much is this going to cost. And all of this is surrounded by political people, where politics is the primary thing that they're interested in. Now, notice there's a little problem with this diagram, and that is the level of technical awareness on the technical people is very high, but by the time you get down to the political people, they really don't know much about the technologies involved at all. Contrarily, the level of political awareness is very low in most technical people, and it progresses higher and higher until you get to the outside. And the problem is, we system engineers have to operate, yes, with technical people, but also with management, with business, and even, as it turns out, with the political process. So we have to cross all of these boundaries. Oh dear. Well, it turns out many, many years ago, Dr. Brenda Foreman developed some primary political facts of life, as she called them, that are essentially programmatic risk heuristics. If you're interested, these are detailed in Meyer and Rechten's The Art of Systems Architecting, the second edition, not the third, not the first, second edition. And I'm going to quote from this, and all of this is derived from work done by Dr. Foreman. First, politics, not technology. Nope. Politics limits what technology is allowed to achieve. It does so in a number of ways. The first and most obvious are budget limitations in terms of the amount of money and what we in the United States call color of money. Now, the amount of money is pretty obvious because if there's no money, there's no program. Duh. All right. But the color of money is a little bit trickier. That has to do with how the budget can be spent. And in most organizations, be they governmental or corporates or others, the color of money is very important. Now, I'll give you a personal example. I want you to imagine that you're not independently wealthy. You have an automobile, and let's assume you have a fixed budget for the automobile, for the loan, for the maintenance, for insurance, registration fees, and things of that nature. And one month, suddenly you run into a problem and you get a big maintenance bill. So what do? You're on a fixed budget. Again, let's assume you're not independently wealthy. Well, so you're just going to call up the auto loan company and say, hey, I'm having a tough month. How about if you give me a little leeway on the loan? Or you call up the insurance company and say, I can't pay this month. Is that okay? Or you call up the government and you say, I'm going to skip registration for a while because I'm in a budget crunch. Good luck with that. In other words, they want their money. They're not interested in your maintenance problem. So that's what I mean by color of money. It's an indication of how money can be spent. It's all for automotive, yes, but loan versus maintenance versus insurance versus fees, you probably have separate buckets, and you can't just move money from one to the other, not easily. There are also regulatory constraints, which we in the United States call export compliance. I'm not sure what the Canadian equivalent is, But there's most certainly fencing. I'll talk about that in just a minute. Various laws, policies, and procedures. Now, there's obviously export compliance in terms of bad guy lists. You can't just send technology or work with certain countries, Iran, North Korea, Russia, or others. But there's also balance of trade considerations. Whether or not you have good relations or bad relations with these countries, you worry about the balance of trade. So import and exports are balanced. There's budget law fencing. Now, this is a little tough to understand, but in many laws, there may be conditions before the money is released to you. I use the example on kids' allowances. So if you were once a child, which you probably were, or if you have children, which you may or may not, hey, when I was a kid back in the 1950s, I got 50 cents per week for my allowance. That was a lot of money back then. That 50 cents US was quite a bit. Could buy a lot of candy with that. So on Friday, I go up to my parents and I hold my hand out with a big smile and say, I'm ready for my allowance. And they'd say, did you clean your room? Did you do your chores? Did you take out the trash? Well, you go do those things and then we'll give you the money. In other words, there are conditions on actually getting the money. So in many cases, you have to do certain things before you actually can get the money that you were promised. There's also laws, obviously, things like environmental laws. You can't just do anything you want. There are restricted species of plants and animals. You cannot impact them in any way. Those things are regulatory constraints. They may keep you from doing what you want to do. And then a tough one, there are scheduled deadlines that are tighter than what you would like to have. Perfect example of this are compressed schedules for military operations, where the military needs to do something in 2 months. So you have that amount of time to get something ready for them. I like the example of the Apollo moon mission, where in 1963, then President Kennedy announced that we were sending a man to the moon and returning them safely by the end of the decade. And he told NASA, okay, I need you to get us to the moon. And the NASA said, sir, yes, sir, we understand, sir, but we think it's going to take 20 years. President Kennedy said, apparently you didn't hear me. I said by the end of the decade. And they said, well, sir, here, let me show you my briefing showing you why that's not really applicable. It's very risky. It's very dangerous. Kennedy threw up his hands and apparently said, okay, then I'm going to give the money to the US Air Force because they're military, they'll follow orders. The NASA said, whoa, 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 not so fast. We'll figure something out. It's going to be risky. We'll try. But that clearly, that compressed schedule had a huge impact on what they could achieve. And there's often cases where you have to make visible progress, checkpoints in your program to meet re-election needs or commitments that somebody in the political process has made to a major constituent. More about constituency in just a minute. So there may be things that you have to demonstrate and you say, I'm not ready. And they say, tough, I need you to demonstrate something. And of course, checkpoints to achieve progress payments on contracts from organizational supporters. This is often a big deal on government contracts because you say, I'd like to move this particular program milestone out a couple of months. And what do the contracts and the financial people say? No, you're not. You're going to hit that deadline because that affects our corporate cash flow. You will make the schedule. And of course, from a commercial viewpoint, there's always time to market. I need to be first or second. I can't be delayed. That's going to limit my technology choices as well. Okay, so pretty clearly, these three major types, budgets, regulatory constraints, and schedule deadlines, will affect us, and those are politically driven. Those aren't based on what you need. These are based on what the political process will give you. Second risk heuristic, cost rules. Oh boy, this is a fun one because there's always insufficient budget. That will result in organizational infighting. I would estimate in most corporations, there's far, far more demands for budget than there is actual money available. So that means organizations are constantly fighting with each other to try and establish a priority. That's going to affect your program as well, because you often have to overstate the benefits and understate the cost just to get a program started. And that's going to have enormous long-term consequences. Okay, the reason for this is if you gave full disclosure of all costs and cost implications during budget approval, would likely wind up with zero. Oh, no. So what do? Well, you can't lie, but you can mislead. For example, you can say, we need this amount of funding now. There's life cycle cost considerations later on, but for now, this is what it's going to take to develop the program. So let's focus on that. And don't you laugh, every last one of this has done this and trying to attract a significant other. Did you present yourself in the most optimal way, or did you tell the other person all about your little habits? You presented yourself in the best possible light. And we also see this when you go to purchase a new automobile from a dealership. You looked in the newspaper, you saw the ads, and you said, oh, I can go buy this particular model car for only $30,000 Canadian. You get down to the dealership and you look around at the floor, the showroom floor, and guess what? It's 40, 50, 60 for all the cars you like. And you tell the salesperson, well, wait a minute, what about the 30,000? And they said, well, yes, we do have one of those. Let's show you out in the parking lot. It doesn't have all the bells and whistles and features you want, but there it is. What happened here? Well, they hooked you by bringing you in with a low value, and then they're going to try and convince you to buy something more. So you can do this. In other words, you can hook the political process with a low value and then expand it later on. I didn't say lie. I said you can present things partially. You also have to re-win program funding every year because all the priorities shift every year. So a decision that was guaranteeing money for a 5-year basis, people may change their mind on the second year, third year, because let's face it, times change. And there's never enough money available to properly fund all items. That means somebody somewhere is likely to get rejected or deferred until next year. And there's always, therefore, somebody attacking you, trying to take your funding away, saying, look at that, that's a waste of time. You should be giving that money to a more beneficial program like mine. Okay, there's always somebody doing that to you. Also, there's governments and organizations, you need to realize they rarely provide an optimal funding profile. They typically prefer a budget that is level loaded over a longer period of time, a flat amount. Again, this is the result of many demands for scarce resources. It's about like having 5 pieces of bread and a jar of peanut butter, and there's only a little bit of peanut butter left in the jar. So what do? You take the knife and you spread it kind of thinly across as many slices of bread as you can. You put the amount that you really want. No, you don't have that much peanut butter in the jar. So we call this peanut buttering in the political process. And since most governments and major organizations and corporations function on a cash flow basis, this means that long-term savings are routinely foregone to minimize immediate outlays, with the thought, oh, we'll worry about that in a later budget cycle. And we've seen this. The cost of construction versus maintenance versus disposal. Many programs will focus on this is what it costs to construct this program. Yeah, there'll be maintenance charges, and yeah, eventually we'll have to worry about disposing of this, but that's later on. You're focused on now, so let's focus on the amount of money you need to spend now. That means that overall life cycle economies of scale are routinely sacrificed for slower acquisitions and stretch outs, and that will inevitably cause higher unit costs and greater overall expenses. The reason for that is, again, because you as an engineer will come up with an optimal funding profile. And guess what? The political process says, I can't afford all of that upfront money. And to save money later on, I need to save money now. This means you may get non-optimal construction funding profiles. So there'll be schedule slip outs that will inevitably increase program construction costs. Suppose, for example, you need to do something where there's going to be critical facilities, infrastructure, training, system verification, test facilities have to be built, research and development of critical technologies. All of these things have to be done up front. Usually it's going to cost more money. That will save money later on. And the political process says, I can't give you that amount of money up front. I can give you this amount of money, and that means that you are going to have to stretch things out. And by the way, that will raise costs, and guess who gets blamed for the cost increase? You. It's not fair, I know. Third risk heuristic, a strong and coherent constituency is essential. Your constituency has to be strong, and usually that means you're going to have a large number of different stakeholders in it. They must be coherent. They must be laser focused and strong. The reason for this is every program has to serve multiple agendas. There's different stakeholder priorities, different needs, different rationale for their support. You may think that your stakeholder is somebody who is purchasing your system, but what about your corporate or government financial people? They're stakeholders. How about program management? How about all of the infrastructure people and support people and training people? They're all stakeholders, and they all have different priorities and needs for how they support the program. That means there's going to be a lot of pressure on the system, especially to have something that is common, that's multiple mission. One size fits all. Now, we know that doesn't work very well with automobiles simply because some people need sports cars, some people need buses or SUVs or vans or something like that. You can't just build one that fits all, but we've seen examples of that. The VW Volkswagen, for example, the Beetle. So there's lots of pressure for some commonality. And every successful program must serve multiple agendas because of the different stakeholders. There is a misguided but eternal hope for a one-size-fits-all. Now, the latest example I can point to is the Joint Strike Fighter. This became the F-35 program. It was going to serve the needs of all of the U.S. military, lots of different militaries around the earth, even though those all have different needs. Military services, let's face it, an aircraft for a carrier versus a ground versus overseas, they all have different needs. So let's face it, it's very hard to have something that is a successful program when you have different people with different needs. Obviously, there's the media. It can strongly influence supporters and detractors, and we have a new factor that is creeping in, and that's the rising influence of social media, crowdsourcing, big data analytics, and generative AI. These things are beginning to affect programs because the constituents supporting the program may see inputs from social media may not be accurate, but nevertheless, that will influence them. Fourth, programmatic risk. Technical problems become political problems. obviously all big budget, high-tech, government-funded or organization programs operate in a political fishbowl. Everything you do is seen by everyone in the political process. And the reality is, if you're working on some basic research or anything that stretches out the technological envelope, you're going to run into political, technical difficulties. I used the example of Edison and the electric light bulb. Now, we had a successful industry in North America on gas lights. In other words, we had people that were employed to go out there and turn on the street lights at night and then turn them off in the morning. And people said, well, here's all of the constituents supporting this. And then Thomas Alva Edison said, how about if we use electricity instead? He went through thousands of different materials before he came up with a successful light bulb. And even that was a baked carbon filament. It wasn't today's light emitting diodes or compact fluorescent or the tungsten or anything like that. It was a very, very simple thing. Can you imagine if he was government funded or if there was somebody funding him? They saw failure after failure after failure after failure, and they said, Edison, come on, give it up. These gas lights, they work well. Large number of people employed by this. And here you are, obviously wasting our money on this ridiculous idea of a glowing, what? Look at that light. Oh, that's pretty. Look at there, that light bulb, it's working. So there was once upon a time where automobiles, for example, were laughed at. Horse and buggy was the way to go. And automobiles were not looked at with much favor. Likewise, incandescent lights were not looked on with favor. And later on, light emitting diodes and others were not looked at with favor. Anything that is disruptive to the prior technologies is going to become a political problem, as you're messing with somebody's rice bowl. Furthermore, high visibility in these kinds of programs, because if you're doing something that is stretching the technological envelope, you're going to have failures. You're going to learn from those failures, but there will be failures. But there's going to be foes looking for excuses to seize your funding. See, look, I told you they were going to fail. I just knew it. You should take that money away from that ridiculous idea and give it to somebody more deserving like me. All right, so there's always somebody leveraging these technical problems and using it as a political opportunity. So technical problems become political ammunition. Remember all those people that weren't funded or didn't get all the funding they wanted? They're the ones that are going to be coming at you. Worse yet, there will be valid scientific reports that are generated. Maybe they're required because of contractual. Maybe the technologists need to generate reports about their progress. These will be misunderstood or misused for political purposes. Now, misused, there are occasions where hostile politicians will sic somebody to go get some dirt on a program or organization. I want you to go out there and tell me what's really going on. I sense that there's something wrong. So go find me some dirt so I can cancel this program. Oops, excuse me. Or possibly it may well be that you have a number of people who don't really understand the meanings of those reports. This comes down to the fifth and the big whammy. The best engineering solutions are not necessarily the best political solutions. This is the hardest one for engineers to understand because we're logical. We're used to thinking logically. We use the scientific method. We look at facts, we look at theories, and we validate things based on fact. Not so the political process. It uses a reasoning process that is not logical. I want to emphasize that. A reasoning process, but it's not logical. It works on the basis of negotiation, compromise, and appearance. That's how the political process works. Now, most technical people will look at that and say, well, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. Let me bring out all my briefing charts and all of my charts, my graphs, and my test results and prove to you that my point is correct. Well, the political process isn't going to buy that. The reality is that programs that create jobs or improve political position are more likely to be funded than programs with theoretical goals like basic research. Why? Because it's easier to negotiate in the budgetary process and come to a compromise on something that has immediate benefits, what we in the political process call WIFM. That's an acronym. What's in it for me? What do I get? If I fund your program and it creates jobs, jobs equals voters. Voters that have jobs are more likely to vote for me. So I'm probably going to pick programs that will provide more jobs. Okay. Now, usually there will be something that looks like a trade study to technical people. Maybe there's three choices: choice A, choice B, choice C. All right. And the technical people say, well, obviously I've done the analysis and choice B is the best technical choice. And guess what? The political process comes back and says, no, choice A is the best choice. No, it's not, says the engineers. Yes, it is, says the politicians, because I can negotiate and come to a compromise on choice A. I can't on the other choices. So this appears to be insane to engineers. At least they may come up with, the political process may make technically questionable choices. Now, technical merit is essential, no question. Engineering elegance is necessary, but the determining factor for the political system is usually near-term affordability. It's easier to negotiate something where you can get to something that everybody agrees to and come up with a compromise, not necessarily whether it's the best technical solution. And the political people look at the engineers and say, you're naive. You don't understand. You're showing me your charts, your scientific reasoning, and your logical choices. That doesn't work in politics, because what you say is the best technical choice. I can't get funding for that. I can't come up with a negotiated compromise. So I can on this, which you think is illogical or insane, and I can on that because you folks are being naive. Oh, well, reason for this is very simple. Most politicians have neither the technical background nor the time to understand technical implications of their choices. And in fact, if we were to look at the US Congress, out of the 535 members of the US Congress, only 23 at present have a science or engineering background. The rest are largely lawyers, educators, or others. They know nothing about technology. Oh dear. So that is going to create a problem. Now, those are the 5 political facts of life, or programmatic risk heuristics, that were proposed by Dr. Foreman. I proposed a number of others. Now, the 5 proposed by Dr. Foreman seem to fit almost every program. There's something like that happens. These may or may not be applicable, but when they are applicable, you need to observe them. Timing is everything. I like to explain that if I went to the US Congress on September 10th of the year 2001, and I'd said, I'd like $100,000 to develop a database of people that are trying to get a pilot's license, but they're only learning how to take off. They're not doing any training and landing. If I did so on September 10th, what would happen? I'd probably be laughed. You're not getting $100 million for such a thing. I went back and I did this on September 12th of the year 2001. What would happen? I'd say, 100 million, forget that. Here's $1 billion US, get cracking. We need results fast. What happened? Well, obviously September 11th, 2001. So the timing of when you ask for money and when you do stuff can be highly, highly important. Next, political problems become technical problems or opportunities. Now that sounds like fact of life number 4 I just went through. That was technical problems become political problems. This is the reverse. If there's a political need, that will create a technical problem or maybe a technical opportunity. And I think we've seen a number of these in infrastructure systems. Politics prefers immediate, near-term gratification. Oh yeah, simply because they're trying to strive to achieve immediate, urgent needs. They don't have enough time, they don't have enough money. So therefore, this year is more important than out years. Furthermore, in the US at least, there's an event horizon on elections. 2 years for the House of Representatives. All 435 members of the House of Representatives are up for re-election every 2 years. And it takes 3 years to run a successful re-election campaign. Every 4 years for the President of the United States, every 6 years for the Senate. Now, I understand it's different in Canada, but nevertheless, there are people who are very, very near-term focused on their need for re-election. Next, politics believes in gurus and heroes. Oh, this person is considered to be an expert on this. If they say it, it's probably true, whether or not it really is true. And if their reputation is ever tarnished, they're forever untrustworthy. It's called stink sticks. Okay, so obviously somebody may be put on a pedestal, and Elon Musk said this. Okay, so therefore it must be true. Well, maybe, maybe not. Okay. And we've seen a number of cases where individuals have fallen off that high pedestal and nobody believes them, even if what they're saying is accurate and true. So politics believes in gurus and heroes. Next, a catchy slogan is essential to getting attention. How many times in election campaigns have you seen campaign slogans? Okay, that is absolutely essential to get attention. And we've seen that in a number of areas. Take a look at advertising jingles that are used by major corporations. Okay, so if I were to say something that would point towards a particular company, you're going to remember that. That's what advertising is all about. Perception is often more important than the truth. Oh dear. So, what is the viability of COVID vaccinations? Well, lots of people with lots of different opinions, some scientifically based, some where they have a perception one way or another. Their perception is often more important than the actual truth, the scientific basis. And if you've ever tried to argue with somebody on one of these topics, say electric vehicles versus internal combustion engines, you're immediately going to run into their perceptions. You can hit them with as many facts as you want. They're going to say, this is what I believe, I'm going to believe it. Next, staffers shape decision-making. This is something that many engineers forget. All of these political folks have a large number of staffers, okay? In other words, these are people, administrative assistants and the like, that assist them in their job. I want you to imagine you're an engineer, a lowly engineer, and you need to go speak to the vice president of engineering. So what do? You just march into their office and say, hey, I have something really important for you to hear. What happens? You try and get close to that vice president of engineering. What do you run across? An administrative assistant that says, yes, do you have an appointment? You say, no, listen to me, you lowly peon. I have a very important engineering decision. I need to speak to the vice president of engineering immediately. I want you to get me in there right now. Well, guess what the administrative assistant is going to do? They're going to smile at you sweetly and say, "Yes, sir, I understand your need. I'm going to put you in the queue." And they take your request, and guess where it goes? Either into the trash can, but if they're honest, in the bottom of the queue, or if they're really malicious, what do? They wait until the boss has had a really bad day, comes storming out and says, "All right, who's next?" And they pull out your slip of paper and says, "Mr. Curitan has something important he wants to talk to you about." Oh, you just got set up for failure. So you need to recognize that sometimes these staffers, they're not highly paid. They're not as technically knowledgeable or politically knowledgeable, but they're a barrier you have to go through. And something that you generally need to understand is that the political process is in risk denial. They are risk adverse. They try and avoid risk wherever possible. So if you present something as being risky, there will be a mental bias of, well, you technical people need to work that. We need a success oriented schedule or budget. So there's lots of risk denial that goes on in the political process. Now, again, this list here doesn't always happen, but these are big, big factors in many cases. Let me wrap this up because I probably have panicked you. The political and organizational systems I've been talking about are bewildering and intimidating to the typical systems engineer, but it doesn't have to be that way. It's actually very profoundly interesting, engrossing, and a challenging process. If you look at a difficult engineering problem, this is as challenging to get the political process and the organizational process to support you. It's just as challenging. It is an engineering challenge simply because it molds the context in which your design, production, fielding, training, operations, sustainment, support, and disposal must function. The entire life cycle will be molded by organizational and political processes and the like. Only when you don't understand these do you get a sense of cynicism or a sense of powerlessness in engineers. And most engineers, when confronted with these political facts of life, say, "Oh, that's politics. I don't want to deal with politics. I just want to deal with my program. Give me my budget, give me my requirements, give me my schedule, go away, don't bother me, and I'll deliver." Well, that's naive. That's not the real world. Programmatic risks can be understood by astute system engineers. These political facts of life, these heuristics for programmatic risk, you can use those to help program management in pursuing program success. You can win one of the toughest games going, and that is to have a successful program in spite of all of the political processes. Now, that's all that I have. I've finished just about on time. If you have any questions, we're going to let Ivan do some questioning now. You can always contact me at my Incosi account. It's kenneth.curitan@incosi.net. Notice that's Curitan, not Cretan, not Curton, not Curtin, or any of the other misnames. I bet you everybody messes up your name as well. And I have proposed a follow-up to this presentation to do a workshop with a case study to demonstrate the impact of programmatic risks and possibly what you might do about them. I exposed what they are. Now, what do you do about them? And with that, Ivan, I will turn it over to you for Q&A.
Okay, thank you, Ken. Very interesting. A couple things. Well, one, anybody who did attend the International Symposium, you'll know that I had listed some Canadian innovation at each plenary session, and you gave me an unintentional lead-in, Ken. So peanut butter, you mentioned peanut buttering. 1884, it was a Canadian patent, the process for making modern day peanut butter.
But there's
So
never enough.
yeah, there never is. Um, You know, also another thing that struck me is the you mentioned slogans, you know how far you can get with slogans. I know I've had difficulty in the past. I can think of an example where I was having trouble getting the organization program teams to go through the V without it being waterfall. They felt it had to be waterfall, and I said, no, it's not. And so I just reused, I didn't coin it, but I reused the terminology concurrent engineering, and it just changed the culture and the behavior. You know, I was beating my head against the wall, but a slogan worked. You know, another example is I worked hard on the left side of the V with our requirements characteristics to have, you know, a good testable or verifiable requirement. Once we got that, that was good. I thought it would just flow through, but then when we got to the right side of the V, it didn't change the behaviors as much as I had hoped. But again, we coined the term requirements-based testing. Again, probably used anywhere and everywhere, but just ingraining requirements-based testing as a slogan, as a catchphrase, perhaps. It changed the behaviors and the culture, which was really good. So,
Ivan, how about agile? I don't know what agile is,
whoa.
but it's really good stuff. Let me sprinkle some of this agile magic dust in my program. Problems will go away. I'm
Oh,
not putting down agile. Agile systems engineering is very valuable. However, comma, it's a slogan.
yeah. We all have an agile shaker on the table.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, let's open it up to questions. You can put your questions in the chat if you wish, if you don't want to ask yourself. Otherwise, I invite you to just raise your hand using the React button at the bottom of your screen, and I'll call upon you to ask your own question. We do have Ned has put forward a question here, or a comment. Politics is logical, rational, given their priorities. There is a nice summary of different ways of thinking at a buster.medium.com link that Ned has provided. So please take a look in the chat. He
Thank
also
you.
goes on to say, consider the story of the six blind men and the elephant.
Oh, absolutely. I use
I've
that
heard
in
that
my
one.
classes.
Yeah, that is a good one.
Okay.
A classic example. Reza, you have a question. Please go ahead.
Yes, hello, Ken. Uh,
Hello, Riza.
I have question related to uh, involvement of ChatGPT and AI in general. Normally, traditionally, all these heuristics that are being approved or have been validated, aren't those heuristic in future need to be revalidated rather in the dynamic environment and in the machine learning environment?
Absolutely. As not just revalidated, but the priorities of them may shift in different programs and in time. I would point out the role of the media, for example. Yellow journalism in the 1800s, early 1900s had a huge effect. Nowadays, maybe a different kind of effect. So the way that the political facts of life impact will change in time. And that's the part that needs to be revalidated. And yes, AI is very helpful on that as an augmented intelligence, not as an artificial intelligence.
Right. Basically, what I was referring to, a lot of responses, if you use or if people use AI as a companion or ChatGPT as a companion to provide answer, so the accuracy for their response in the decision-making process is going to be more accurate. Therefore, whole issue with the political issue and maybe get reduced a bit in that
Hopefully,
environment.
however, it depends on what's in the training database, doesn't it?
That's for sure. That's for sure. We are talking about the using targeted chat GPT, which is trained for a specific procedure or a specific task that you have, not generally any domain. Yeah,
Right.
that is for sure. Thank you.
Okay, and hopefully, Reza, you saw my email regarding Wednesday's meeting. Hopefully that AI stuff will be useful for discussion, okay?
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Very good. Any other questions or comments?
If I might jump in here quickly.
Go right ahead.
So thank you. It sounds a lot like maybe just don't talk like an engineer. Is a lot of what I'm hearing. Try to maybe take it down a notch with the technical standpoint. Is there anything like better trade studies, like more measurables that you or more ways of rating, like actually including cost of parts? I mean, is there any kind of data that you think will actually get through other than
Yes.
maybe kind of wording that, because a lot of the words we give them are going to be more hazy if we speak less technically. Therefore, they're not always going to get what they expect, and we may not get what we need. So I'm just curious if there's more thoughts.
I'm hoping to show this in the workshop. 95% of the time, the constituency to get your supporters to go in there and exert leverage or pressure on the decision-making process in a company, an organization, or a government for your particular point of view. And that leverage, if you look at the number of people who will understand the technical basis, don't do that. Explain it to them in terms of with them. What's in it for me? In other words, what does somebody get by supporting your particular program? And if you explain that in non-technical terms, they're more likely to get it. Sounds manipulative, and it is, but it's truthful.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine trying to sell, say, MBSE to my manager who's not a systems engineer. So I have to talk to him in terms of cost savings, but some of these numbers are hard to put in a way that make any kind of sense to anybody at all, or certainly not realistic. But I don't know. There might be other ways of handling that, but I can certainly see where you're coming from on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me try and get back here to my one diagram. What you're pointing out is if I'm going to talk to somebody who's in management, I need to focus on cost and schedule, not so much performance.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Ivan,
All right, thank you.
anyone else?
Let me see, no more in the chat. Please feel free to just don't even bother raising your hand, just unmute and go ahead with any questions or comments. We're a small enough group here. Yeah, Ned.
I've actually got, I don't know, whether you can see me, I can't see me, but
we
I've got a
can
little
see.
toy here that depending how you look at it,
Yes.
it's a square, a triangle, or a pie shape. But
Right.
it's to say it's one piece of foam. And
Right.
that's the point, is you have one program and it's all these different ways of looking at it. Thanks.
Right.
Good one.
Absolutely. Okay, and Ivan Taylor has raised his hand. Hi, Ivan.
I can. Yeah, just a couple of comments, not real questions, but just comments. I have a PhD in public policy where I learned about political economy and how you can think of everyone, politicians, bureaucrats included, acting based on their self-interest.
With them.
And so I think that explains a lot of behavior when you think in those terms.
Yes.
You may think that people are irrational, but actually, when you look at it, like you say, from their perspective, with the idea that they're acting in their own best interest, then you can sort of see, how they're doing.
Agreed.
A couple other things. One was what was it called? Something like action-based decision making. So so decision making, like say trade studies, can lead sometimes to analysis paralysis.
Yes.
And so say a lot of people, like you say, will focus on action, especially leaders. They're focused on action, not on inaction. And one of the strategies that I think bureaucrats often do is, let's say they have a goal in mind, and they want to say, for example, I had an experience in my community where the politicians wanted to close a school, a public school, and they decided to do a study. And so they took two schools, one that they wanted to close, and one that was obviously not a good candidate for closing. And so they did the study and came up with the decision that this school that they wanted to close was the right decision. And so that sort of led to an idea of action-based decision making, that they wanted to get the action done. They didn't really want to, make a rational decision based on all the alternatives.
Understand.
The last point I wanted to make, though, was during my work on procurement and program management. I read a study. I think by the General Accounting Office that talked about Ford Motor Company, and Ford Motor Company, at various times in their life were basically bankrupt or heading towards bankruptcy.
Yes.
And somehow the management was able to convince project managers, program managers, to actually take a look at their programs in light of other programs that are seeking funding, and step aside if their program was not the best choice for the whole company. It's, for example, if the company is going to lose money because their program is going to be accepted, then they should step aside and allow another program to. And somehow they were able to convince program managers that they need to act in the best interest of Ford, not in the best interest of themselves.
They had to offer incentives to those program managers to do so.
Well, I don't know if they offered incentives, but somehow they convinced them that it was better for them in terms of keeping their job to step aside than it was to push ahead for their own little program.
There's the incentive. Continue to be employed versus the company going bankrupt and out the door you go.
Yeah. Anyways, those are some thoughts that I had
Thank you,
from my
sir.
experience.
Very good. We're right at time, but if anybody else has another comment or question, please go ahead. No? Okay. Well, with that, Ken, I'd like to thank you on behalf of all of the attendees and those who will watch this recording afterwards. Thank you very much for sharing. I did place in the chat a reminder that Ken has kindly offered to come back and work through a case study. If anybody has ideas for the case study, please enter them in the chat. Please reach out. You could reach out to Ken directly. His email address was provided. You can reach out to the Canada chapter. You can reach out to me, ivan.rodriguez@incosi.com, .net, .org. What are we? I forget. It was
.net.
.org. .net.
It's
yeah.
Our emails are .net.
.net. Good, thank you. But I just tossed out the because we have a strong transportation Canadian contingent. I tossed out the thought of maybe a rail transit, and I thought I went a little bit further, rail transit transformation. That because there'd be some politics there.
Oh, sure.
So I thought maybe that's just an idea. But if anybody has a better idea, please provide it. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Ken. And
thank you,
everybody have a
everyone,
good
for your
evening.
attention.
Bye.
Bye now.